The wind in Montana doesn't just blow, it hunts. It was a blade of pure, frozen cold, carving through the territory, and I was caught right in its path. Snow was coming down so thick I couldn't see my horse's ears, and my fingers, even wrapped in wool, were completely numb. I was squinting through a wall of white, a world that had just disappeared. Somewhere out there was a place called the Carter Ranch. Somewhere out there was a man named Elias Carter, my mail-order husband. I'd been on the trail for 3 days straight, following a set of directions on a piece of paper that was now a soggy mess in my pocket. The stagecoach driver, a man whose teeth were permanently stained with tobacco, had dropped me at the last settlement. He looked at the sky, shook his head, and said he wouldn't go an inch further. "You sure about this, miss?" he'd asked, his eyes full of pity. Ain't no place for a lady to be wandering alone. But I had to be sure. The letter in my bag, the one I'd read 100 times, promised me a new life, a husband, a young daughter to care for. After the war took everything from me, my home, my job as a field nurse, this was my only chance to build something again. Now, with the storm trying to tear me from the saddle, I was starting to think I'd made a horrible mistake. My horse, a tough little mare, stumbled through a snowdrift that came clear up to her knees. I whispered words of encouragement, but I think they were more for me than for her. My dress was soaked. Ice clung to my eyelashes. Every breath was a sharp, painful puff of white. And then I saw it. Through the swirling snow, a dark shape. An angular line that wasn't a rock or a tree. A house. My heart hammered against my ribs with relief. I urged the mare forward, praying it wasn't some mirage born of cold and desperation. It was real. A 2-story house with a wide porch. Smoke was curling from the chimney. Someone was home. My legs were unsteady as I dismounted, sinking into snow up to my shins. I fumbled with the reins, my fingers clumsy with cold, and tied the mare to a hitching post. The wind slammed into me as I climbed the wooden steps, each one groaning under my weight. I raised my fist to knock, but I hesitated. This was it, the start of my new life. In a few seconds, I'd meet Elias Carter. Our letters had been practical. We talked about running a household, about his daughter's needs. I knew he was a widower. I knew he ran cattle. But I didn't know the man. Was he kind? Was he cruel? Would he even like the look of me? The wind made the decision for me. It shoved me forward, and I pounded on the heavy wooden door harder than I meant to. I heard footsteps from inside, heavy, deliberate. The door swung open, and the man standing there was not what I expected. He was huge, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that filled the entire doorway. His hair was dark, almost black, but streaked with silver at the temples. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and just as cold. They looked at me with an expression that wasn't welcoming, but wasn't hostile either. It was just empty. "Sir," I managed to say, my voice a whisper against the wind. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I believe you're expecting me." His expression didn't change. He looked past me, at the storm, then back to my face. "I'm not expecting anyone." My heart fell straight through the floor. "Are you not Elias Carter? This is the Carter Ranch, isn't it?" "No, ma'am," he said, his voice rough, like he didn't use it much. "This is the McGrath place. I'm Jonas McGrath. Carter's Ranch is another 5 miles east." 5 miles. In this blizzard, it might as well have been 50. I looked back at the wall of white, then at the man. I could feel desperation creeping into my voice. "Please, sir, I don't think I can make it any further tonight. If I could just shelter here until the storm passes." He just stood there, his gray eyes weighing me up. The only sound was the wind howling like a hungry wolf. It felt like an eternity. Finally, he gave a slow, grudging nod and stepped back, opening the door wider. "Just for the night," he said. His tone made it clear this wasn't an invitation. It was a necessity. "Stables around back for your horse." Relief washed over me so powerfully, my knees almost buckled. "Thank you. Truly, We'll see to the horse first," he interrupted, already pulling on a heavy coat. "Storm like this can kill an animal quick." We fought our way through the snow to a sturdy barn behind the house. Jonas moved with a silent, efficient purpose, helping me unsaddle the mare and get her settled with hay and water. He didn't speak. I tried to help, but my numb fingers fumbled with the buckles until he gently pushed my hands away and took over. "Been traveling long?" he asked. It was the first personal question he'd offered. "3 days," I replied, rubbing my hands together, trying to force some life back into them. "From Missouri originally." "I was meant to be a bride," I said, the words feeling foolish in the cold air. His hands stilled for just a second on the horse's bridle. "Mail order?" The question was blunt, but I was past being offended. "Yes, Mr. Carter and I have been corresponding." He just nodded once, as if that explained everything. When the mare was settled, he led me back to the house. The snow was coming down so hard now, I couldn't see the barn from the porch. Inside, the house wasn't much warmer than the barn. A fire crackled in a huge stone fireplace, but the room felt cold. The furniture was simple, wooden, and clean, but there was nothing comfortable about it. It was a house that was lived in, but not loved. It felt like a place where laughter had died a long time ago. "Coffee's on the stove," Jonas said, hanging his coat on a peg. "There's bread and some cold beef if you're hungry." I took off my own wet coat, grateful to be out of it. I smoothed down my dress, suddenly aware of how tired and dirty I must look. "Thank you, Mr. McGrath. I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," he said, but his tone said otherwise. "Storm brought you here. Storm will take you away when it's done." As I moved toward the warmth of the stove, my eyes fell on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. There was a small, framed photograph, a daguerreotype of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, holding a small child. It was obviously a treasured object. Jonas saw me looking. His jaw tightened. "My wife," he said, his voice flat. "She's been gone 3 years now." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said softly. He gave a single curt nod and turned away. "There's a room upstairs you can use. I'll bring up some wood for the stove." He disappeared up the stairs, leaving me alone in the main room. The house was heavy with silence and secrets. I poured myself a cup of coffee, wrapping my cold hands around the warm mug. It was shelter. For now, that was enough. But then I heard it, a sound that turned my blood to ice. From somewhere deep in the house, a child's voice. It was so soft I could barely hear it over the wind, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of pure, desperate fear. I set my coffee cup down. The soft clink on the wooden table seemed to echo through the silent house. The whisper had come from down a narrow hallway, lined with closed doors. Jonas was still moving around upstairs. I was alone down here. I felt myself being pulled toward the sound. The floorboards creaked under my feet, no matter how quietly I tried to walk. At the end of the hall, one door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible beyond it. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. It was a child's bedroom. A small bed, a few wooden toys scattered on the floor, and in the far corner, something moved. A small figure was huddled against the wall, curled up so tightly she was almost invisible in the shadows. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Her auburn hair was a tangled, matted mess around a face that was far too thin. Her dress, once white, was now a dingy gray. Her feet were bare, even in the freezing cold of the house. But it was her eyes that stopped my breath. They were huge in her gaunt face, dark brown and filled with a sadness that no child should ever know. They locked on to me with an intensity that was both piercing and completely empty, like she was looking right through me at something horrible. "Hello, sweetheart," I said gently, crouching down to make myself smaller. "I'm Clara. What's your name?" She didn't say a word. Her little hands just gripped her knees tighter, her knuckles turning white. I could see how thin her arms were, the sharp line of her collarbone under the worn fabric of her dress. This child was starving. "I'm staying here tonight because of the storm," I continued, keeping my voice as soft as a whisper. "Are you Mr. McGrath's daughter?" Still nothing, but her eyes flickered. She understood. She just wouldn't or couldn't answer. I took a small step closer, my heart aching for this broken little creature. "Are you cold, dear? Would you like a blanket?" She shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Are you hungry?" I tried again, another tiny shake of the head. But I could see it was a lie. The girl was wasting away. I settled onto the floor a few feet away from her, letting her get used to me. You know, I said, I've been traveling for a very long time, and I'm quite tired. Would you mind if I just sat here with you for a little while? For the first time, something in her expression changed. The fear in her posture eased, just a fraction. We sat there in the silence, the wind howling outside, rattling the windows of the old house. I didn't push. I just waited. And then her lips moved. At first, no sound came out. Then so quiet I had to lean in to hear it, a whisper like dry leaves rustling across a grave. Don't let him take Mom again. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I must have misheard. What did you say, sweetheart? The girl's eyes went wide as if she was shocked she'd spoken at all. Her hand flew to her mouth and she shrank back against the wall, terrified. It's all right, I said quickly, my mind racing. You don't have to be afraid. What do you mean about your mama? But it was too late. She was gone, retreated back into her shell of silence, shaking her head frantically. Her eyes darted toward the doorway, and I knew what she was afraid of. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Jonas's tall frame filled the doorway. His cold gray eyes took in the scene. Me on the floor, the child pressed into the corner. And his expression became even more closed off than before. Lydia, he said. His voice was completely neutral. What are you doing out of bed? Lydia. Her name was Lydia. The little girl's gaze flickered between me and her father, her small body trembling. I could see the battle raging inside her, the desperate need to speak warring with a deep primal terror. She was just sitting here, I said gently, getting to my feet. I think the storm might have frightened her. Jonas's jaw tightened. Lydia doesn't talk. The statement hung in the air between us. She hasn't spoken a word, he said, choosing his words carefully, since her mother died. A mute child, traumatized by the loss of her mother. It made sense, but I knew what I'd heard. Lydia had spoken. She had whispered those terrible words. How long has it been? I asked softly. 3 years. He stepped into the room, and Lydia curled up even smaller, trying to disappear. Come on, Lydia, back to bed. He reached a hand down toward his daughter, and that's when it happened. Lydia's head snapped up. She looked directly at me, her eyes pleading. Her mouth opened, and in a voice like rustling leaves, she whispered it again. Don't let him take Mama, like he took her. The effect on Jonas was devastating. The color drained from his face. He stumbled backward as if I'd struck him. His eyes went wide with a horror so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. His hands started to shake. What did she say? He whispered, his voice cracking. I looked from the terrified father to the terrified daughter, my mind reeling. Lydia had spoken. There was no denying it now. But the words and Jonas's reaction, this was something far darker than grief. She spoke, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my thoughts. She's been speaking to me. Jonas sank down onto Lydia's small bed and buried his face in his hands. That's impossible. She hasn't said a word since the night Elizabeth... He couldn't finish the sentence. I knelt beside Lydia again, ignoring Jonas for the moment. Sweetheart, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What happened to your mama? Lydia's gaze flickered to her father, then back to me. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, clearer. The bad man came in the dark. He made Papa drink the burning water, and then he took Mama to the cold place, where she couldn't come back. Jonas's head shot up, his face a mask of agony and confusion. Lydia, what bad man? What are you talking about? But she had retreated again, shrinking back against the wall, as if the effort of speaking had drained every last ounce of her strength. That's enough for tonight, I said firmly, rising to my feet. I looked at Jonas, at the raw pain in his eyes. She's frightened and tired? We should let her rest. He just nodded numbly, lost in a fog of confusion and horror. As I turned to leave the room, I felt a small hand clutch the back of my skirt. I looked down. Lydia was staring up at me, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. Don't go away, she whispered. Please don't go away like Mama did. My heart broke. I knelt down and gently touched her thin shoulder. I'm not going anywhere tonight, sweetheart. I'll be right upstairs if you need me. She nodded, released my skirt, and curled back into her corner. I pulled a threadbare quilt from the bed and draped it over her small, shaking shoulders before following Jonas out of the room. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, his face buried in his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed and haunted. I don't understand, he said, his voice hoarse. She hasn't spoken a word in 3 years. The doctor, he said the shock, her mind. I studied his face, looking for any sign of a lie, of deception. All I saw was a man drowning in a sea of grief, grappling with a daughter who had just rewritten the story of their lives. Children often know more than we realize, I said carefully. Sometimes they see things we miss. His laugh was a bitter, broken sound. What could she have seen? She was only 3 when Elizabeth died. Just a baby. Old enough to remember, I replied softly. Old enough to be afraid. He straightened up, some of his composure returning. Your room is ready, he said, his voice flat again. I put extra wood by the stove. It was a dismissal, but as I walked toward the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just stumbled into the wrong house. I had stumbled into the middle of a murder. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Lydia's voice. The bad man came in the dark. It wasn't the rambling of a traumatized child. It was a memory, sharp, terrifying, real. I was up before dawn, the gray light filtering through a frost-covered window. The storm had finally started to weaken. Downstairs, I could hear Jonas moving about, the familiar sounds of a man starting his day, the clink of the coffee pot, the thud of wood being added to the fire. He was standing at the kitchen window when I came down, staring out at the endless white. He turned when he heard me, and the exhaustion in his gray eyes hit me like a physical blow. He'd been awake all night, too. Storm's breaking, he said, handing me a cup of coffee. Roads might be passable by afternoon. The message was clear. It was time for me to go. Time for me to continue on to the Carter Ranch, to the life I was supposed to have. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. McGrath, I said formally. Carter's a good man, he grunted, turning back to the window. You'll be well cared for. He was trying to convince himself as much as me. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his knuckles were white around his coffee cup. I had to know. May I ask about your wife? I said gently. How did she die? He went rigid. For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, mechanical, like a story he'd told 1,000 times. Accident. Winter of '67. She went out during a blizzard and never came back. Found her body 3 days later in the ravine near Willow Creek. He'd rehearsed those words, but I saw the tremor in his hand. I heard the tiny catch in his voice on the word body. That must have been terrible for you and Lydia, I said softly. His laugh was harsh. Lydia doesn't remember much. She was just a baby. Better that way. The bad man made Papa drink the burning water. She seems to remember more than you might think, I said carefully. He slammed his coffee cup down on the table, making it rattle. Lydia's mind was damaged by what happened. The doctor in town said children that young can't process that kind of trauma. Whatever she thinks she remembers, it's not real. He was shouting, desperate, trying to drown out the truth with the force of his own denial. Before I could answer, a small figure appeared in the doorway. It was Lydia, still in her wrinkled dress from the night before, her feet bare against the cold floor. She looked at her father, then at me, and then she walked slowly, deliberately, to my side. Without a word, she reached out and took my hand. Her tiny fingers were ice cold, but her grip was strong. She gave a gentle tug, pulling me. She wanted me to follow her. I looked at Jonas. His face had gone dark. He saw his daughter, who hadn't touched him in years, clinging to a complete stranger. Lydia, come eat your breakfast, he said, his voice tight. She just shook her head, her grip on my hand tightening. She pulled me more insistently, leading me toward a door I hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a tall cabinet. Where does that lead? I asked. Jonas's face was pale. Nowhere important, just storage. But Lydia was already pulling me toward it. I let her lead. The door opened onto a narrow, dusty staircase leading up to an attic. Lydia, no, Jonas said sharply. There was panic in his voice now. You don't need to go up there. But Lydia was already climbing, her small bare feet determined on the wooden steps. I followed her. I could hear Jonas's heavy footsteps behind me. Reluctant, afraid. The attic ran the full length of the house, filled with ghostly shapes of furniture draped in white sheets. But in the center of the room, on top of a large trunk, was a shrine. Dresses in faded blues and greens, a silver hairbrush, intricately engraved, a pair of delicate leather boots, and in the middle of it all, another photograph of the woman from the mantelpiece, Elizabeth. This time she was in a wedding dress, her face radiant with hope. Elizabeth's things, Jonas whispered from behind me, his voice thick with emotion. Lydia led me right to the trunk. She pointed to a leather-bound book lying open next to the photo. It was a Bible. On the inside cover, in elegant handwriting, it said, Elizabeth Rose Patterson, beloved wife of Jonas McGrath, married June 15, 1862. But that wasn't what Lydia wanted me to see. Her small hand reached under the Bible and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The edges were worn, as if it had been read over and over. She pressed it into my hand, her dark eyes wide with urgency. Lydia, put that back, Jonas said sharply, moving toward us. But it was too late. I had already unfolded it. It was a letter, written in the same elegant script as the Bible inscription. The date at the top was March 10, 1867, just weeks before Elizabeth died. My dearest sister Margaret, it began. I write to you in great distress, for I fear my situation here has become dangerous. The man Jonas hired last autumn, Harlan Danner, has become increasingly bold in his attentions toward me. When I reject his advances, he grows angry and threatening. Yesterday, he cornered me in the barn and said terrible things. I am frightened, Margaret, but Jonas trusts Harlan and refuses to see the threat he poses. The man drinks heavily and has a violent temper. I fear what might happen if... The letter ended right there, as if she'd been interrupted. My hands were shaking. I looked at Lydia. Where did you get this? She pointed to a small gap between the floorboards where the letter had been hidden. Then she tugged on my skirt and whispered, so softly I had to lean down to hear. Mama was scared of the bad man. She told me to hide when he came. Jonas had gone completely white. He stared at the letter in my hands as if it were a snake. I never knew. She never said anything. His voice trailed off as the pieces began to click into place in his mind. I could see it on his face. The horror of realization. Harlan Danner, he whispered, the name like a curse on his lips. He was here that night. He brought whiskey, said we should drink. I remember drinking, but after that... He pressed his hands to his temples, his face contorted in pain. I can't remember anything after that. Lydia had been watching her father, waiting for this moment. When she spoke again, her voice was clear, stronger than I'd ever heard it. The bad man put the burning water in Papa's cup. Then he took Mama outside, and she never came back. I saw from the window. The silence in that attic was absolute. Jonas sank onto a crate, his face a mask of pure agony. He drugged me, he said, his voice hoarse. God help me, he drugged me. And then he couldn't say it. He didn't have to. I knelt beside Lydia, my heart breaking for this brave little girl who had carried this impossible secret for so long. Why didn't you tell anyone, sweetheart? Tears filled her eyes. The bad man said if I told, he would come back and take me to the cold place too. He said no one would believe a baby anyway. Jonas looked at his daughter, his expression one of complete devastation. Lydia, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have protected you. But Lydia surprised us all. She walked slowly to her father and placed her small hand on his knee. It wasn't your fault, Papa, she whispered. Mama told me before the bad man came. She said you were good, and the bad man was trying to trick you. For the first time since I'd arrived, Jonas pulled his daughter into his arms. I watched the tears track down his weathered cheeks, and I knew that something in this cold, sad house had just broken wide open. But my mind was already racing. Harlan Danner, he murdered Elizabeth. He threatened a 3-year-old child into silence. Where was he now? And what would he do when he found out his secret was finally out? As if in answer, a sound echoed from outside. The sound of horses' hooves approaching the house. All three of us froze. I saw the terror leap back into Lydia's eyes as she pressed herself against her father. "He's coming back," she whispered. "The bad man is coming back." The horse turned out to be a neighbor's, wandering loose after the storm. But the raw terror in Lydia's eyes had changed everything. Harlan Danner wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was a real and very present threat. Jonas spent the rest of the day moving like a man in a trance. The revelation had shattered him. He'd spent 3 years blaming himself, living in a prison of guilt, only to find out the truth was 100 times worse. He hadn't failed to protect his wife. He had been a pawn in her murder. Lydia, on the other hand, refused to leave my side. It was like finding that letter had opened a door for her, and she was clinging to me as if I were the only thing that could keep it from slamming shut again. I gently washed her face and braided her tangled hair, and she sat perfectly still, soaking up the simple act of kindness like a flower starved of rain. "Tell me about that night," I said softly, working the knots from her hair. "What did you see?" She was quiet for a long time. Then in her whispery voice she began. "Mama was scared for many days. She kept looking out the window. She wrote letters, but she burned them. That night, she made me promise to hide in the cupboard if the bad man came, no matter what I heard." My hands stilled. "She knew something was going to happen." Lydia nodded. "She said the bad man was getting angry because she wouldn't be nice to him when Papa wasn't watching. She said he might try to hurt us." It was a chilling picture. Elizabeth, trapped in her own home with a predator, trying to protect her family without making things worse. "What happened when he came?" I asked. Her small body tensed. "He came after Papa went to bed. He knocked on the door and said he had to talk to Mom about the cattle. He had a bottle with him. He made Papa drink from it. Said they were celebrating. Papa got sleepy, real fast." I felt sick. Jonas, drugged and helpless, while his wife faced her killer alone. Then what? Mama tried to wake Papa up, but she couldn't. The bad man laughed. He said Papa wouldn't wake up till morning. Then he put his hands on Mama. Mama screamed and tried to run, but he caught her. He said they were going outside to talk. Her voice dropped so low it was barely audible. I watched from the upstairs window. He was pulling her by the arm. They went toward the creek. I waited and waited, but only the bad man came back. Tears were streaming down my face. "He came back inside," she continued, her voice trembling. "He moved Papa to his bed, and he burned some of Mama's things in the fire. Before he left, he looked right at my hiding place. He said if I ever told anyone, he would come back and take me to the same cold place where Mama was." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He hadn't just killed her. He had systematically destroyed a family, tormenting a child into silence and leaving a man to drown in guilt. "Has he come back since then?" I asked, dreading the answer. She nodded, her whole body shaking now. "Sometimes he comes to talk to Papa about work. He always smiles at me when Papa isn't looking, and he whispers that he's glad I'm such a good, quiet girl." My blood ran cold. The monster had been returning to the scene of the crime, feeding on their fear, enjoying the power he held over them. "Lydia," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "do you know where this man lives?" "He has a cabin about an hour's ride north," she whispered, "near where the river bends. Papa says he moved there after Mama died because he felt bad about what happened. An hour's ride. He was close. He might have seen the extra smoke from the chimney. He might already know a stranger was here, a stranger who could unravel everything." Just then, Jonas appeared in the doorway. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single morning. "Roads are clearing," he said flatly. "You could probably make it to Carter's ranch by mid-afternoon." I looked down at Lydia. Her small hand had grabbed my skirt in a death grip. "Don't go," she whispered, so softly only I could hear. "Please don't leave me alone with the bad man." My heart felt like it was being torn in two. My future, my safety, my entire plan was at the Carter ranch. But how could I leave this child? "Mr. McGrath," I said carefully, "we need to contact the sheriff." His laugh was a hollow, bitter sound. "Sheriff Hawkins is Harlan's cousin. You think he'd take the word of a traumatized child over his own family? He'd call her crazy and run us out of the territory." We were trapped. No one would help us. Miss Whitmore, Jonas said, his voice heavy with resignation. This is our burden to bear. You have your own life to live. You need to go. But I couldn't. Looking into Lydia's terrified eyes, I saw myself. Alone, vulnerable, desperate for someone to fight for me. What if we could find proof? I said slowly. Your wife was smart. If she wrote that letter, maybe she wrote others. Maybe she hid something else. It's too dangerous, Jonas said, his voice grim. If Harlan even suspects we know the truth. He didn't have to finish. That afternoon, as I was packing my bag, feeling like the worst person on earth, a visitor arrived. An elderly woman with sharp eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun. Mrs. Henrietta Hensley, she announced, sizing me up. From the next property over. Heard there was a stranger staying here. Wanted to make sure everything was all right. Jonas tried to send her away, but she wasn't leaving. Her keen eyes took in everything. Lydia clinging to my side, the tension in the room. You know, she said, her voice casual, I've been meaning to stop by ever since I heard Harlan Danner was back in the area. The name dropped like a stone in the quiet room. Jonas went pale. He's been gone, I asked. Oh yes, dear, Mrs. Hensley said, her eyes glinting. Left right after poor Elizabeth's funeral. Said he couldn't bear the sad memories. Just came back last month. And the interesting thing is, he's been asking questions around town, wondering if Jonas might be looking to sell, wondering if any strangers were coming around. He had come back to check on his secret, to make sure it was still buried. Mrs. Hensley, I asked, my voice shaking slightly, what did you think about Elizabeth's death? Her face turned hard as granite. I thought it was mighty strange. Elizabeth McGrath was no fool. She knew this country. For her to get lost in a storm and fall into that ravine, it never sat right with me. Jonas was staring at her. You had suspicions? Suspicions? She snorted. I had more than that. I heard screaming that night, coming from the direction of Willow Creek. Heard it clear as a bell, even over the wind. A woman's voice crying for help. When I told Sheriff Hawkins, he said it was probably just a wildcat. My pulse was racing. Here it was. A witness. There's something else, she continued. The day they found Elizabeth's body, I saw Harlan Danner riding away from the creek area, real early in the morning, hours before the search party even started looking. I locked eyes with Jonas. We both knew what it meant. Mrs. Hensley, I said, my voice steady now, if we could prove what really happened to Elizabeth, would you be willing to testify? Her eyes hardened with a resolve that had been simmering for 3 long years. I've been waiting for someone to ask me that question, dear. Yes, I would testify. That poor woman deserves justice. As she left, she turned back with a warning in her eyes. Be careful. A man like Harlan Danner won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens him, and he'll be most dangerous when he feels cornered. I stood in the doorway, the cold air on my face. The sun was setting. I should be riding toward the Carter Ranch, toward my future. But I knew I couldn't go. My future was here, in this cold, haunted house with this broken family. Fate hadn't brought me to the wrong place. It had brought me exactly where I needed to be. As dust settled, a new storm began to gather on the horizon, the clouds dark and angry. My journey to the Carter Ranch would have to wait another day. A part of me felt a flood of relief, and I knew I was in trouble. Jonas was out back splitting firewood. But he wasn't just splitting wood. He was attacking it. The thunk of the axe was sharp, violent, each blow a release of the rage and grief that had been poisoning him for 3 years. Inside, Lydia sat at the kitchen table, drawing with a piece of charcoal on brown paper. I had hoped it would be a comfort to her, a way to process her trauma. But when I looked at what she was drawing, a chill went down my spine. She had drawn their house, but all around it, in the trees, were dark figures. One figure in particular she had drawn over and over again, a man standing in the shadows, watching, always watching. Sweetheart, I said gently, sitting beside her, is this how you feel? Like someone is watching the house? She nodded, her small hand moving the charcoal to make the watching figure even darker. He comes sometimes, she whispered. At night, I see him from my window. He just stands there, looking. Harlan Danner. He hadn't just been visiting during the day. He'd been stalking them, A predator circling his prey, enjoying their fear, making sure his secret stayed buried under a mountain of terror. When Jonas came inside, flushed from the cold and the work, his eyes were wild. "Another storm coming," he said, his voice curt. "You'll have to stay another night." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. And I heard something else in his voice, too, a reluctant gratitude. He didn't want to be alone tonight. Not now that he knew the monster was watching from the trees. "I don't mind," I said simply. "In fact, I think I should stay a few more days, until we figure out what to do." He stopped, a towel in his hands, and looked at me. For the first time, the wall he had built around himself started to crack. I saw a flicker of the man underneath, vulnerable, terrified, and utterly alone. As the wind began to howl, I made supper. The house had the feel of a place where people didn't live. They just existed. Both Jonas and Lydia were too thin, their meals clearly an afterthought. While I cooked, Lydia stayed by my side, a silent little shadow. Jonas sat at the table and just watched us. There was a hunger in his eyes, but it wasn't for food. He was starving for the sight of a normal life, a life that had been stolen from him. "Tell me about before," I said as we ate, the storm raging outside. "What was it like when Elizabeth was alive?" He was quiet for a long time. Then slowly he began to speak. "It was different. The house was warm. She was always singing. Lydia would dance around the kitchen." His voice grew soft with memory. "She had dreams for this place. Fruit trees, a big garden. She said this place could be paradise if we just put enough love into it." The pain in his eyes was a raw, open wound. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," I said. "She was," he said, his jaw tightening. "Maybe too brave. If she had just told me about Harlan's threats." "She was trying to protect you," I said gently. His laugh was bitter. "Instead, she died. And I've been living with the guilt ever since. Some protector I turned out to be." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. His skin was rough from work, but warm, solid. "You couldn't protect her from a threat you didn't know existed. The guilt belongs to one man, Jonas, Harlan Danner." He stared down at our joined hands. When he looked up, his gray eyes were filled with a raw, searching emotion. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "Why do you care what happens to us?" The question hung in the air between us. "Because," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I know what it's like to be alone and afraid, to feel like no one in the world cares if you live or die." His eyes sharpened. "Tell me." I told him everything. About being a nurse during the war. About losing my parents. I told him about the field hospital being overrun, the chaos, the screaming. And then I told him the hardest part, the part I'd never told another soul. "A piece of shrapnel," I said, my hand unconsciously going to my abdomen. "The doctors saved my life, but they couldn't save my ability to have children." I braced myself for the look of pity I'd seen 100 times before, the look that said I was broken, incomplete. But Jonas didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with understanding. He tightened his grip on my hand. "You're not damaged," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met." Tears sprang to my eyes. "How can you say that? I can't even... I'm not a whole woman." "Elizabeth couldn't have any more children after Lydia," he said softly. My head snapped up. "And Lydia was born to Elizabeth's younger sister, who died in childbirth. We adopted her when she was just hours old. The only mother Lydia has ever known was the woman who chose to love her, not the one who bore her." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This man, this broken, grieving man, understood. He knew that family wasn't about blood. It was about choice. "Love isn't about what your body can do," he said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. "It's about choosing to give what you have." The intimacy of the moment was so intense, it felt like the whole world had shrunk to just the two of us, sitting at this small table in this storm-battered house. Then a small voice broke the silence. "Are you going to be my new mama?" We both turned. Lydia was looking at us, her dark eyes wide with a fragile, hopeful question. "Lydia," Jonas said carefully, "Miss Clara has her own life planned. She's going to marry Mr. Carter and..." But I don't want her to go, Lydia cried, her voice rising with panic. She makes you smile. She makes the house warm. Please, please don't go away like Mama did. My heart felt like it was breaking and healing all at the same time. This child, silent for 3 years, had found her voice, and she was using it to ask me to stay. I looked across the table at Jonas. I saw my own confusion, my own fear, my own impossible hope reflected in his eyes. My mind was screaming at me to run, to go back to the safe, practical plan I had made, but my heart was already home. I don't know, I said honestly to the little girl, but I promise I won't leave without saying goodbye. Later that night, with the storm howling like a demon outside, I knew I was standing at a crossroads. One path led to a safe, predictable life. The other led straight into the heart of the storm, toward a dangerous, complicated love that was already starting to burn away the darkness. And I didn't know which path to take. The morning broke clear and cold. A fresh blanket of snow covered the world, sparkling in the sun. But the beauty of it was spoiled by what we saw. Tracks, a single set of horse tracks, forming a perfect, deliberate circle around the house. Someone had been here during the night. Watching, waiting. He knows I'm here, I whispered, a cold dread seeping into my bones. Lydia pressed against my side, trembling. The bad man came back, she whimpered. He always comes back. Jonas's face was grim, his eyes as hard as stone. Pack your things, he said, his voice tight. I'm taking you to the Carter Ranch. Today. Now. No, I said. The word came out stronger than I expected. I'm not leaving. He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. Clara, you don't understand. If Harlan knows you're here, if he suspects you know the truth, you are in mortal danger. Then we face that danger together, I said, my voice shaking but resolute. I will not abandon this child to face him alone again. Before he could argue, we heard it. An approaching horse, not wandering this time, coming straight for the house. Lydia didn't even make a sound. She just dove under the kitchen table, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. There was no doubt who it was. Stay calm, Jonas murmured, though I could see the muscles in his jaw bunching. Let me do the talking. He stepped out onto the porch as a tall man with sandy hair and cold, pale blue eyes dismounted. He smiled, but the smile was a chilling, empty thing. Harlan Danner had come to call. Morning, Jonas. Harlan's voice was jovial, friendly. Saw your smoke these past couple days. Figured I'd check you and the little one weathered the storms all right. We're fine, Harlan, Jonas said, his voice carefully neutral. Thought I saw an extra horse in your stable yesterday, Harlan said, his tone casual. You taking in strays now? He already knew. He was playing with us. Traveler got caught in the storm, Jonas said. A woman, headed for the Carter place. Mail order bride. Is that so? Harlan's voice sharpened. Where is she? I'd love to meet her. Already left, Jonas lied. Headed out first thing this morning. There was a long, terrible silence. I could feel Harlan weighing the lie, comparing it to what he'd seen during the night. That's funny, Harlan said slowly, his voice turning silky and dangerous. 'Cause I could have sworn I saw a lamplight in your upstairs window, well past dawn. And there are still 3 sets of footprints leading from your house to the barn this morning. Yours, the little one's, and someone else's. The trap had sprung. Jonas's lie had just cornered us. I made a decision. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, forcing my face into a polite smile. I'm so sorry, I said, my voice steady. I overslept and made Mr. McGrath late in getting me on my way. Harlan's pale eyes fixed on me, and I felt like an insect pinned to a board. He knew everything. Well, hello there, he said, his smile sharp as a razor. Harlan Danner at your service. And you would be? Clara Whitmore, I said, refusing to look away. Miss Clara Whitmore, he repeated, tasting the name. Traveling all the way from Missouri. That's quite a journey. But I'm sure a smart woman like yourself will be careful. This country can be very dangerous. Why, just 3 years ago, we lost a lovely young woman right near here. Poor Elizabeth McGrath, Jonas's dear departed wife, got lost in a blizzard. Such a tragedy. The casual cruelty of it spoken right to Jonas's face, made me want to scream. I could see Jonas trembling with the effort of holding back his rage. "I should be going," I said, trying to end the conversation. "Oh, but there's no rush," Harlan said smoothly. "In fact, it would be a shame if you left without meeting little Lydia. She's such a special child. Very observant. Aren't you, sweetheart?" My heart stopped. He was looking past me, through the open door. Lydia was standing in the hallway frozen, her face as white as the snow outside. "There she is," Harlan cooed, his voice making my skin crawl. "My favorite little girl, still so quiet and well-behaved. That's good, Lydia. Very good." I stepped deliberately between him and the child, blocking his view. "Lydia, go back inside." Jonas moved to stand beside me, creating a wall between Harlan and his daughter. "Time for you to go, Harlan," he said, his voice low and deadly. The friendly mask dropped from Harlan's face, revealing the reptile beneath. For a second, I thought he was going to force his way inside. Then the smile slid back into place. He mounted his horse, then leaned forward, his pale eyes locking onto mine. "Safe travels, Miss Whitmore. And remember, this country can be very unforgiving to those who lose their way." He rode off, slow and unhurried. As he disappeared over the rise, a single rifle shot echoed across the valley. Then another. Then a third. I looked out and saw a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. He had stopped. He was watching us, and he was telling us that the game had begun. The rest of the day was agony. Jonas barricaded the doors and kept his rifle close. The smoke from Harlan's campfire was a constant, taunting reminder that he was out there, waiting for nightfall, waiting for the storm. "He'll come tonight," Jonas said as darkness fell, his voice grim. "Under the cover of the blizzard. He'll try to make it look like an accident, a fire. Or maybe we just wandered out into the storm and got lost, like Elizabeth." The wind began to howl, throwing snow against the windows. We sat in the main room, in the near dark, a single lamp flickering between us. Every creak of the old house made us jump. Lydia was huddled between us, silent, her eyes wide in the gloom. And then we heard it, the crack of breaking glass from upstairs, followed by the soft thud of footsteps directly above our heads. "He's in the house," Jonas whispered, reaching for his rifle. But before he could grab it, the lamp on the table went out, plunging us into absolute darkness. A voice spoke from the top of the stairs. Calm, cultured, chilling. Now, Jonas. No need for weapons between old friends." "What do you want, Harlan?" Jonas's voice was steady, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. Harlan's laugh drifted down through the darkness. "What I've always wanted, to tie up loose ends. Your daughter Jonas, she had to start talking again. And to a stranger, no less. That simply won't do." I could hear his footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate, coming closer. "I was very clear about the consequences of talking," he said, his voice taking on a horrible cooing quality. "But children are so forgetful. Perhaps a reminder is in order." A match scraped against wood. Harlan's face was suddenly illuminated, floating in the darkness at the bottom of the stairs. He held a kerosene lamp in one hand. In the other, something glinted. A hunting knife. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his smile a death mask in the flickering light. "I'm afraid you've involved yourself in something that doesn't concern you. But don't worry. Your suffering will be brief." Jonas lunged. He moved like lightning, trying to tackle Harlan while he was distracted. But Harlan was ready. He sidestepped and brought the knife up in a vicious arc. Jonas cried out in pain, staggering back, his hand clutching his side, where a dark stain was already spreading across his shirt. "Papa!" Lydia's scream ripped through the air, the first loud sound I'd ever heard her make. "There's my vocal little bird," Harlan sneered. I didn't think. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and swung it with all my might. It connected with Harlan's shoulder with a sickening thud. He cursed, stumbling back. "Run!" I screamed at Lydia. "Hide in the cupboard, like Mama told you." But she was frozen, her eyes wide with terror. I swung the poker again, but Harlan caught my wrist, twisting it until I cried out and the poker clattered to the floor. "Foolish woman!" he snarled, his face inches from mine. He raised the knife, aiming for my heart. A gunshot thundered through the small room. Harlan spun around, a look of pure shock on his face. Jonas was leaning against the wall, the rifle in his hands, blood pouring from his side. But his aim had been true. The bullet had hit Harlan in the chest, but he was still on his feet. With a roar of pure rage, he lurched toward Jonas, the knife raised for a killing blow. I threw myself between them. The knife slid between my ribs, a sensation of ice and fire all at once. The pain was blinding, driving the air from my lungs. I crumpled to my knees, but my body had blocked Harlan's path. It had given Jonas the 1 second he needed. The second gunshot was deafening. Harlan Danner fell to the floor and did not move again. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind and our own ragged breathing. Then Lydia's voice rose in a wail that held 3 years of terror and grief. "Mama Clara, don't go to the cold place. Please don't go." I tried to tell her I was okay, but the darkness was closing in. The last thing I heard before the world went black was Lydia's voice, stronger and clearer than it had ever been, screaming a single word. "Mama!" I drifted on a sea of pain and fever for what felt like an eternity. Sometimes I was aware of Jonas's gentle hands changing my bandages. Sometimes I heard Lydia's small voice, reading to me from her mother's Bible. I floated in and out of darkness, clinging to those small sounds of life. When I finally woke, the fever was gone. The first thing I saw was Lydia, curled up asleep on the bed beside me, her small hand resting on my arm. Jonas was slumped in a chair nearby, his own chest bandaged, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "How long?" I whispered. His head jerked up, and a wave of relief washed over his face. "4 days. We weren't sure you were going to make it." Lydia stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw I was awake, her face lit up with a joy so pure it made my heart ache. "Mama Clara," she cried, throwing her arms around my neck, careful of my wound. "You came back." I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I promised I wouldn't leave you, didn't I?" Over the next few weeks, as my strength slowly returned, I learned what had happened. Mrs. Hensley had shown up the morning after the fight, worried when she saw no signs of life from the house. She found a bloodbath, Jonas, barely conscious, me, burning with fever, and Lydia, a tiny general, trying desperately to care for us both. That tough old woman took charge. She cleaned our wounds, fought my fever, and helped Jonas search Harlan's cabin. They found what Harlan had bragged about, forged letters, supposedly from Elizabeth, painting Jonas as a violent, abusive drunk. They also found Elizabeth's locket and a lock of her hair, sick trophies from a monster. And they found his journal, a detailed, bragging account of how he had terrorized and murdered Elizabeth. Mrs. Hensley burned it all to ash in Harlan's own fireplace. As my body healed, my heart was in turmoil. I still had an arrangement with Elias Carter. I was supposed to be his wife. But the thought of leaving this place, of leaving Jonas and Lydia, felt like tearing a part of myself away. One afternoon, Lydia came to me with a drawing. It showed 3 figures standing in front of the house. A tall man, a woman in a blue dress, and a little girl holding both their hands. Above them, an angel with kind eyes was smiling down. "It's our family," Lydia said, her voice full of a child's simple certainty. "The family Mama would want us to be. Don't you want to be our family? Don't you love us?" Tears streamed down my face. "Yes," I whispered. "I do love you. Both of you." "Then why do you want to leave?" It was the logic of a child, pure and unanswerable. And I finally told her the truth. "Because I'm scared. Scared that I'm not good enough, not whole enough to be the mother you deserve." Lydia looked at me with her wise old eyes. "Mama Elizabeth couldn't have babies either," she said matter-of-factly. "But she loved me anyway. Love doesn't come from your belly, Mama Clara. It comes from your heart." And just like that, the last of my fear washed away. That evening, I wrote 2 letters. The first was to Elias Carter, explaining everything and breaking our arrangement. The second was to the territorial courthouse, requesting the forms to legally adopt Lydia McGrath. Jonas found me sealing them. He saw the addresses and his face went still. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "are you sure? This life, it's not easy." I stood up and cupped his face in my hands. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to build a life here. With you. With Lydia. I want to plant Elizabeth's fruit trees and watch Montana sunsets from this porch. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch. I love you, Clara Whitmore, he whispered. I didn't think I'd ever be able to say those words again. And I love you, Jonas McGrath, I said. 6 months later, I walked down the aisle of the small-town church. Jonas was waiting for me at the altar, his eyes shining. But it was our flower girl who made me cry. Lydia, her face glowing with happiness, scattered rose petals at my feet. When the Reverend asked who gave the bride away, her clear voice rang out. I do. I give Mama Clara to Papa, so we can be a real family. As we walked out of the church, husband and wife, with our daughter holding both our hands, I knew my journey had ended. I had set out looking for a safe harbor and a practical arrangement. Instead, I had fought a monster, faced down death, and found something so much better. I had found a family. I had found love. I had found my way home. If you enjoyed this story of justice, survival, and a family reborn from the ashes, do me a favor. Hit that like button and make sure you subscribe, because there are a lot more dark and twisted tales where this one came from. And leave a comment below letting me know the exact moment you realized Jonas wasn't the villain. I can't wait to read what you think.